We went from essentially one major IXP. We now have 7 that have come to being in the last 2 years, and they're all a very different story. Similar models, but very different creation stories, and different stories in terms of where they are after 2 years. But a few of the key lessons that we learned is they really have to be community-led. They cannot be top-down imposed. And as much as we were catalysts, we were very sensitive to that we had to have the community actually believe in the merits of the IXP and drive it, so that when an IXP got up and running, the local community would take significant ownership. So that was one of the key threads, that they had to be community-led, not top-down imposed. From a governance perspective, we found that often they're led by technologists who want to simply get going and do the work. But a reasonable governance structure is absolutely key to mitigating problems downstream. So in a sense, getting incorporated, getting a real board of directors, and having a structure is absolutely critical in the very early days to mitigate problems later in an IXP's life. And also the fact that they should generally be a not-for-profit environment to mitigate the costs for the members of an IXP to the greatest degree possible, and that the IXP should not be a revenue generator. It is a place to connect, not to generate revenue. And those are three, I mean, there were certainly many lessons learned in creating the 5 or 6 new IXPs in Canada, but as far as cross-cutting themes that were relevant to all, and I would posit to any IXP, those were certainly 3 of the core themes that we learned in the Canadian experience. Now, with that, I will turn it over to Bevel, who has been in and around this space for a very long time, has worn many hats, and can speak to us in particular from the experience in his region, but also beyond. Bevel.
Thank you, Byron, and good morning, everyone. My name is Bevel Wooding. I work with Packet Clearinghouse as an internet strategist and as a Caribbean outreach manager. I've been actually involved in the setting up and running of what is now 11 active exchanges in the Caribbean region, either directly or in a support capacity. And that experience over the past 5 years or so has really given an interesting insight into the different types of startup processes. And like Byron was saying, the uniqueness that exists in every territory, combined with some very common patterns that you see across the region. So I want to give a very quick history. Most of you would know the Caribbean is made up of some relatively small markets. Several of those markets have duopoly or de facto monopoly type internet service providers. And when the drive to establish exchange points began somewhere around 2006, there wasn't really any developed technical community in the region. The initiative was really championed by the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. I served then and still act in a support capacity for the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. And we felt at the time that given the emphasis that was being placed on the internet and internet economies and knowledge society, that this whole issue of what's the foundation that allows for the creation of this knowledge-based economy, what was that foundation? We felt that exchange points had a big part to play in it. I remember Bill Woodcock of Packet Clearinghouse giving a presentation in Curacao in 2006, and the response by the regulators and the government officials present at that meeting was, well, if this is so obvious, why hasn't it been done anywhere in the Caribbean? Surely there's some secret that you're missing out, or some bad story that you're not telling us about all of these benefits that IXPs are supposed to provide. What that did back in 2006, really, it set the track for what became an approach to IXP promotion that I have not seen or heard about in other parts of the region. Most of the IXPs that have been established in the Caribbean have been regulator-led. Not regulation, policy-led, but regulator-led. The ISPs, the internet service providers, actually requested that the regulators in most countries, I'm talking about 90% of the exchanges form, that the regulators play a leading mediation role in bringing them to the table to discuss what should have been an obvious technical efficiency that would benefit their networks. And so from Curacao to where we are now, the governments and regulators have played a key part in promoting the exchange points. But what that has done is created a situation where now that we have, as I said, 11 active exchanges, the ISPs, having fulfilled this requirement to establish the exchange point, have not really committed resources to continuing or growing the exchange points. And so we have a situation where we can look to see territories where you have a local champion, somebody who is both aware of the technical requirement for an exchange point, but is also keenly aware of the need to encourage local content development or encourage the situation of needed foreign content to the local market. Those are the ones where we're seeing growth and development, and the ones where ISP simply fulfill the regulatory or government pressure or requirement are the ones that are right now floundering. And in the region, we've gotten the same kind of pushback that obtains in other territories. Dominant players are saying we don't need this, there is no local content, these markets are too small. We even had reasons thrown as to why IXPs were not necessary for the Caribbean, such as it could negatively affect government tax revenues if they disrupted the traditional income flows of the incumbent operators, to statements like, our networks are already optimized to deal with the traffic consumption patterns in the region. And what we had to do very early that I think led to the momentum that we gained, what we had to do very early was move that conversation away from the technical actors and broaden it to bring in the content creators, government agencies that were seeking a faster, cheaper internet. And so the working group meetings for exchange point establishment in the Caribbean started to look like a multi-stakeholder environment where people were more interested in the benefit that they were not now seeing from the internet than they were in what was the technical underpinnings for it. That created a very important platform for what we have now. And it also, I would say, provided us with some important counterpoints to the kind of anti-IXP sentiment that was expressed. One, of course, was the general awareness that every country should have a sufficiently robust local internet infrastructure. And I'm saying these and they may seem obvious, but for the government officials, for the private sector, these were not obvious follow-on points or benefits from establishing an exchange point. Remember, the discussion up to that point was largely amongst ISPs who were enjoying a particularly close economic circle. And once we cracked that open, this issue of what are these better, greater economic opportunities started to come to the fore. And so we're at a point now where one ISP has said openly in a public forum that we know what we're doing is inefficient, but no one has asked us to stop. And if you come to the regions, the territories in which we operate in and push for an exchange point, we will support you. But if you don't, we'll continue as we are. And I think that kind of summed up the general disposition of the incumbent operators. So we're at a point now where to build that momentum, we had to establish an effective technical community. So CARIBNOG, the Caribbean Network Operators Group, started out of the realization of a need to have an active community around the exchange point process. Research, we brought the universities in to ensure that they can benefit from these new hubs for monitoring and observing traffic pattern and the like. Content, bringing in not just government actors, but local media houses and allowing them the understanding of how local traffic to local audiences can improve their business models. And of course, stakeholder engagement. And next year, we'll be actually looking at a state of the Caribbean broadband connectivity plan to get real figures about the difference between the broadband that is being promoted or marketed and the actual speeds being achieved by consumers. All of this is to give further strength to the argument that local internet infrastructure is a necessary part of building out an effective economy. So summary, champions, local, important, governance, absolutely clear, a clear sense of what the exchange points need to do for them to be most relevant to local environments, a strategic plan, how you're going to grow beyond peering, to content production, and of course local, regional and community engagement as a key forum for not just initiating the process, but continuing it onward.
Thank you, Bevel. A very interesting story where you had to actually educate many stakeholders on the benefits, and not just on the benefits, but mitigate the fears. I thought also one interesting point made there was the notion of educating the content creators. So it's not, when people think of IXPs, that's often not one of the communities they're thinking about, but if you can educate the content creators about how to get their content more effectively, more efficiently, more economically to their local market, they can become a very loud advocate. Okay, on to Google and Mike Blanche.
Thanks, Byron. Good morning, everyone. My name's Mike. I work for Google in London. I do a variety of things, working on infrastructure development with Google, building our network, working with our telecoms partners, mainly in Europe and Africa, and have been involved in a number of Internet Exchange projects in different places. I'm also a director of the London Internet Exchange, but I'm not wearing that hat today. So first thing to say is Google is definitely a big fan of Internet Exchange points. We're a member of over 70 IXPs on every continent around the world, apart from Antarctica. And when the penguins set one up, we'll probably go and join that one. We've supported the establishment and growth of Internet Exchange points worldwide, both directly and through organizations like the Network Startup Resource Center, who do an amazing job. We see Internet Exchange points as a really important part of the internet ecosystem, and it doesn't matter whether it's a big IXP, a small one, whether it has lots of traffic, small amount of traffic, whether it's a new IXP or an old IXP, that they're all important and they all bring benefits. Bevel's talked a bit there about the kind of the startup and growth phase of IXPs, and I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of the impact of that, of how Internet Exchange points can help transform economies into internet economies. So I think there's three kind of categories and orders of effects that happen when you have internet exchanges. The first order effect is the kind of simple ones that most people know about these days, that when you peer, it reduces cost for the people you're peering with, it improves performance by reducing latency and so on, and it brings operators together into a community. The second order effect is on the broader internet infrastructure in a country and in a region. It enables new infrastructure, new connections, and new content to be hosted in a region. And the third order is what we're really talking about here, is the internet economy part. It enables new users to come online. It enables development of new services, new revenues, new business models, and this whole new internet economy that we're interested in building. So the first type of effect is the simple stuff, the act of interconnecting, of connecting your network to somebody else and exchanging traffic, has benefits that we all know about and have been written about many times in terms of improved performance, reduced cost, a mutually beneficial relationship between the people that are connecting. We can help build that by building the network effects of the internet exchange point by getting more people to connect. The more people connect, the more benefits there are. And the people connecting can come from all parts of the internet ecosystem. It doesn't just have to be telecoms operators and ISPs. It can be content companies, it can be governments, it can be educational networks. And everyone has a part to play in helping to increase those network effects. The second type of benefit comes from this new infrastructure. And what you start to see when an internet exchange point starts to build scale is that other interesting things happen. New submarine cables start getting built to countries, or national long-haul infrastructure starts getting built. We saw this in East and Southern Africa, for example, when the internet exchanges in Nairobi and in Johannesburg, for example, started to grow and get scale. Companies like Liquid Telecom built the first terrestrial link between those two cities, crossing 4 or 5 countries. So you no longer had to use submarine cable capacity to reach between them. And today, over 100 kilometers of fiber optic cable is built and buried in Africa every day. And that's not down to IXPs, but it's certainly, there's an influence there. More infrastructure comes with data centers and co-location facilities. Now there's an internet exchange point, there's somewhere where content providers can come to host their content and to store it and to serve it very close to where the users are. And carrier-neutral data centers have started to spring up in Africa, again in Johannesburg, in Nairobi, I think there's plans in Mombasa, and other cities around Africa. And an internet exchange point is a real kind of magnet for those kind of developments to happen. And then you start to get new transit providers coming in, companies that previously would never have connected to these countries, bring their services to a country, and quite often that results in the price of transit falling and the cost of connectivity falling because there's new providers offering services. And when the transit providers come, quite often then the content providers come as well. And Google and other content providers are big investors in infrastructure. In the past 3 years, content providers have invested over $100 billion in infrastructure around the world in terms of data centers, submarine cables, network, content delivery networks. And bringing our content close to where users are is a key part of that investment. So there's this virtuous circle that you're starting to get. But the third type of impact is, I think, the most exciting, and this is what we're really looking for. With these reduced costs that you get new users coming online, people who previously couldn't afford to be on the internet are now able to come online. There's new revenues for telecoms operators, even. There was a study by the Internet Society in 2012 that looked at the impact of the Nairobi Kenyan Internet Exchange Point. And even then they found that they estimated that the telecoms operators in Kenya generated $6 million of new revenue just because of increased performance, so users used the services more because the performance was better because they were appearing at the Internet Exchange Point. And this was 3 years ago. Those benefits, I'm sure, have grown manyfold since then. And there's new services that previously wouldn't have worked that now are enabled. So, for example, e-government services, online tax filing, online education. And finally, new businesses. If you can reach your local market and the people that know the market best are able to develop applications and services that are relevant for that market and deliver them efficiently, cost effectively, and with high performance, that really helps build this new internet economy.
Great, thank you very much. And some really interesting, not just anecdotes, but real life stories about benefits that we don't necessarily think about when we're thinking about the benefits of IXPs. So those, I mean, just the fact that, I know it's not a direct result of, but that there's 100 miles of fiber being built in Africa every day is staggering. Just to actually provide some anecdotal evidence to back up some of those comments from the Canadian perspective, 2 IXPs went in particular, 2 markets that were very underserved, had incumbent operators and everything that goes with well-established incumbent operators. But once the IXPs got started, hearing many of the reasons that they shouldn't, but once they did get up and running, a global transit provider we were able to convince to join, and they saw the merits of it, and Hurricane came into those 2 markets, Hurricane Electric, where they had never been before, and we saw the cost per meg for ISPs at a wholesale level drop from between 15 and 20 Canadian dollars per meg to $5 per meg within months. And in fact, now in one of those markets, it's about $2 per meg. So when you think about over the course of 24 months, the wholesale cost going from 15 to 20 to 2 as a direct result of starting the IXP, transit being attracted to that, and just recently Akamai is a content provider located there. So the virtuous cycle that Mike just spoke about actually happened in those 2 particular IXPs. And with that, Hernan.
Thank you. Mike summarized incredibly well the case for IXPs. Now, and I'm a researcher, and I come with a bit more of a skeptical perspective. Say, well, the theoretical case is very well established, and we all agree, I believe, that all these great things that could happen and should happen are great. But are they really happening? And this is the question that we set out to study in Latin America, and particularly trying to establish counterfactuals, because internet is evolving so fast and prices are dropping and traffic is increasing. So the million-dollar question is, these trends, would they have continued, or has the IXP accelerating, and by how much the IXP is really accelerating these trends that are in themselves already happening? So we try to bring some more evidence to the discussion by studying Bolivia. And Bolivia is a fascinating case, and we chose it for several reasons. One of them is that Bolivia faces some of the most biggest connectivity challenges in the region. Just to give you a brief sense, it's about 17% connectivity in terms of the regional average. Is only 17% of the population online, or however you measure it in terms of the regional average. Now, Bolivia is a poor country, but even if you take into account wealth and so on, it's way below what you would expect from in terms of its level of wealth. It's also where prices are highest. We measure prices in Bolivia, access prices at the retail level are about 3 times higher than the regional average in Latin America, which is already very high. And part of the reason that prices are so high and volumes are so low in Bolivia is it's, as you know, is a landlocked country, and it's got great difficulties in accessing the undersea cables. So the transit prices are incredibly high. We found prices always over $100, $120 a month, where in Lima and Santiago, which is where the Peru and Chile, which was where the traffic was going through, you can find prices for about 20 or 25. So clearly there's a markup of 4 times between just to get the traffic from Bolivia into the undersea cables in the Pacific coast. So you would think that with all this situation, with low volumes, high transit prices, IXPs would be an ideal, an obvious solution to some of those problems. And the second interesting thing is what the government did, which it passed a new interconnection law in 2013, and the law explicitly said we require that all ISPs come together and create an IXP. And the law initially said, you're welcome to create it however you want it, just do it. And they couldn't agree on how to do it, so the government had to come in and basically establish the parameters of how the IXP would work, and we can discuss a bit more of why wasn't that a great outcome of the process. So we set out to establish what the impact was of the IXP in Bolivia, and one of the things we did is we deployed probes, network probes around the edges in the network of Bolivia. And those probes were basically sending trace routes to different, to all /24 prefixes in Bolivia, and we left them running for several months. And we measured basically 2 parameters. We measured round-trip time, and we measured the number of hops in those routes. And we then categorized the routes between international routes, basically routes that we knew were going out of Bolivia and then coming back, which is the usual tromboning, and then routes that were going now through the new IXP. And so we compare the results in terms of the round-trip time and the number of hops for those 2 categories of routes. So we found great results. On average, the route that's going through the IXP was, in terms of latency, was 70% below that of an international route. So you have a gain of 70% or 7% lower latency or lower round-trip time for a route that is within the IXP or is passing through IXP compared to the route that is going out and in and inside Bolivia. And we also found a reduced number of hops, about a 30% reduced number of hops in a route going through the IXP as compared to the international route. So the technical case seems to be compelling for the IXP in Bolivia. Now, the reality of the IXP in Bolivia as of now is that is stagnant, that it has not increased. And so briefly, what we think the lessons are is first that it's not enough to have a technical compelling case. There has to be the economic incentives and the political incentives have to be aligned. And this is where come back to the idea that the government basically had to impose the IXP model on the ISPs, and the ISPs, for a number of reasons, were less than happy about that. And also, the economic case has not been compelling, and I look at it as an endogenous problem. Because the traffic volumes are low, the CDNs are not attractive to the IXPs, and because the CDNs are not attracted to the IXPs, traffic doesn't grow, and then you get into this a cycle. So also the economic case, which seemed theoretically compelling, has not been realized in Bolivia. And lastly, the lesson we drew was the idea, I think, Byron, you mentioned, the top-down versus bottom-up. Really, this was not a bottom-up process. The government initially wanted it to be a bottom-up process. It did not, the SPs did not agree. The government had to come in very top-down, establish the very parameters of, very detailed rules about how the IXPs would work, and in fact, hosted the IXP within the state telecom operator of Bolivia, which created even more problems for the IXPs. So really the lesson is there's not enough to have a technical compelling case. There has to be good alignment between economic and political incentives for the IXPs to flourish. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think a very important case study in potentially the challenge of doing it. You've actually lived the experience of imposing it down and not having it work effectively or live up to the theory. Thank you. Ariel.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Let me share with you the Argentinian experience and try to set a couple of points, because what Mike summarizes just before, I totally agree. And we also fight with the problem of Argentina is a large country, and we have very several regions without connection, or without connectivity, so we needed to solve the problem. So we create a model. Starting in 1995, we start our first IXP in the capital of the country, Buenos Aires, and at that age, we pay, just to give the numbers, we pay $40,000 for a 64K connections, $40,000 monthly, okay? In 2004, we get at the IXP all the telecom companies, all the ISPs, and we can get in the IXP, in the Buenos Aires one, no more than the 1% of the total traffic an ISP needed. So after that, we start a process. We started in 2009, a process that we named the way to get all the cities, the major cities in the country, at the same level. Okay, it's a federalization of the bandwidth. We name it. So, at that process, we understand that in the case of Argentina, we needed to interconnect our IXPs, because if not, we will have the same case that I understand is happening in Bolivia. They don't have the ability to grow enough. So we built up a process to open more than the Buenos Aires one, and we're still doing. In fact, last week we opened the number 16 that is up and running now. And the growth of the traffic and the drop of the cost are the numbers, the magic numbers that we get. One ISP or one connectivity provider or one content provider that is connected to one of our IXP, because all are in a network, can get between the 65 to the 72% of all the traffic they need against the 1% that we have 10 years before. So, and the traffic and the cost of the traffic drops to $4 in Buenos Aires or $18 in a very faraway city in the north of the country, more than 2,000 kilometers from the capital. And the cost, and the reason of this different cost is because we need to pay the national long haul to reach the other IXP, the northest one. So, but just to share with you the numbers, they have been paying the last month, on October, $400 for a meg. And now they are reaching the 65% of all their traffic at $18 per meg. And the magic of the number is not just the price of the meg, is the availability of the bandwidth. And this is the difference. When you are open an IXP, the availability of the traffic and the bandwidth is the difference. Then the prices goes down. And then it's a virtual circuit that you grow and grow and grow because, but the reason why we do it and we are facing this is because it's a national issue for us to interconnect and to develop new ones. We are a non-profit association, but we take this project as a national project. And I guess this was the difference in different cases, for example, with Bolivia and other cases in Latin America, where are not connected, or there were different models, like in Brazil, which is they are sponsored by the CGR or the NIC-BR. We are just we start as the ISP association. Now we change of the Internet Association because we accept governments, we accept universities, we accept content providers, we accept media providers, because they give us local content, local traffic. They are very important key participants and members of our IXPs. Just to share with you another important issue that we changed in our history is that at the beginning, when we established the first one, we required for the telecommunications government license to be connected to the ISP, because we understand that was just a telecommunication issue. Now we say that it's not. So we cut this mandatory issue and we changed that it's open. Everyone that have content or traffic to put on an interchange on the Internet of Spain is welcome. And I think that this change of mind on every of us, including the government, to say that, okay, you don't need to be a telecommunication operator or under a license to have content and provide and be interconnected in an IXP. So I guess this is part of the story that...
Thank you. That's a very powerful story and interesting to see how it was an evolution in terms of thinking of it as just a group of ISPs exchanging traffic to an open, inclusive, anybody with content can participate. Also that part of your plan included connecting IXPs as individuals to make the whole thing work, and of course the number that's remarkable is $400 a meg to $16 a meg. That's $18 a meg, sorry. And Milton, the story in Brazil.
Okay, I will try to share our experience. In our case, in Brazil, Internet Exchange started in 1996. So this was academic Internet Exchange. This academic Internet Exchange is growing. Others Internet Exchange from the commercial initiative start. Because this academic model we use to obligate every participant to exchange traffic to every other participant. So mainly the incumbents don't like this kind of model. Okay, we have some initiative from the data center, from the associations. Because of the growth of this academic Internet Exchange that we have in FAPESP, this was very populated. FAPESP don't like to continue this kind of projects, so made agreement with the Telemark and passed this kind of infrastructure to the Telemark. The Brazilian Internet Steering Committee see that this is bad things because we need to have no commercial Internet exchange in the country. So we start our project, PTT Metro project in 2004. Okay. So we heard from the PCH, Woodcock, that the model that we will have a more economic model is a model that interconnects all Internet exchange that we have in one region. Okay, so we start the PTT Metro project, inviting others Internet exchange to interconnect all together, mainly Telemark Internet exchange point in that moment. Okay, so we start this project totally open. All participants can do everything. Only they need is to exchange traffic in IP. Okay. We work a lot, mainly because in that moment, these incumbents don't like to participate. We heard from the build clock that present in our meeting a donut model. I don't know if you know the donut model, that the incumbent is in the core, the donut, and the others IXPs is in the donut. Okay, so to have the traffic from one IXP to the other, we need to pass to the core and go to the border. So the Internet exchange point modify this kind of picture. So nowadays, I agree that the total traffic don't pass to the incumbent backbone. Because the Internet exchange done this kind of service to the all Internet service provided in the country. So nowadays we have more than 900 AS interconnect in our project. We start the project when the Brazil has only 177 AS in 2004. Now we have more than 3,600 AS in the country. About 70% of these AS participate in the Internet Exchange Point project in the country. Nowadays, the ISPs, the medium and the small IXP in the country, represent about 25% of the access in the country. Okay. This participant share with us that about 60% of the traffic came from the Internet Exchange points. Mainly the IXP that attend the residential access, household access. And when the ISP attend the commercial access, about the 30% came from the Internet Exchange point. So this kind of infrastructure affected the cost of the Internet service provider in the country. About the main reason to participate in the Internet exchange point from these ISPs is mainly because the cost reduction and better quality of your infrastructure. After the connection, the feeling that these ISPs feel in this kind of infrastructure is the qualities is very good. So this is a main reason to participate in the Internet Exchange point, the quality. And after...
Milton,
Okay.
just in order to make sure we have time for a question, I'm just going to have to ask you to wrap up in fairly shortly.
Okay, thank you. So, I need to add in this kind of infrastructure that other services that we put in our infrastructure, like quality of measurement, we put root servers, NTP servers, service like this that has a good quality of the internet in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Interesting how often the exchanges can start in such different ways. In the years came out a research network, an academic network. And often the exchange of traffic between research networks is a good base upon which to build. Well, which is evident here, given that, correct me if I'm wrong, you said 60% of traffic is now flowing through IXPs in Brazil. That's quite a testament to the success of them. Thank you very much, everybody. And now I'd like to turn it to the floor. Any questions? I mean, we have a pretty remarkable range of experience here. Not all of it a successful outcome, which is often where the best lessons are learned. Any questions for the panel? Sure, you just have to come up to a mic. There's 2 stand-up mics in the back.
Hello, my name is Shiva Upadhyay. I'm from India, and I work for National Internet Exchange of India, and we also having a similar problems that Argentina faced a few years back. Likewise, what we are having a problem likewise, we are having a IXPs, but the traffic is not growing up because we, as per the ISP license criteria is there to connect to the ISP. But we are planning to connect content providers. But my question is like an interconnection of the ISPs will make us a transit ISP kind of thing. We will become an ISP then. So how it will work actually? So because somewhere in ISOC and some researchers I studied likewise is a failure model also to connect to interconnect ISPs.
Who'd like to take that one on?
Yeah. I think that there is an issue also with the type of agreement, and I think it's part of the thing. We have set up at first the multilateral agreement, which means everyone is obligated to interchange all the traffic, and the incumbent doesn't like that. And the transit IP providers, international, they don't like neither. And the thing for the growth is to find a champion, and not a person, a company, an IP transit that wants to go with that. And after that, the work is to allow, and we did, in part of the negotiation, we allow to have bilateral agreements, not just only the multilateral agreement. So the multilateral in our case is mandatory. The bilateral is an option. And this was the key to have the others IP transit. Okay. And also we define make some tuning, if you want, that in the multilateral agreement, you are obligated just to put in the traffic, to push the traffic, your regional or local traffic, not your international traffic, not the traffic that you sell for the others. And I guess maybe this can help.
Okay, you do it, your IXP charge for ports also? Yeah, it's free.
No, we have a very, we are not for not profits, we just cover our cost and we charge our member just to cover the cost of the operation of each one.
So very less charges we are charging for likewise for 10 megabits.
We have a special meter system. We charge in part of for the port, but part for the other expenses that we have. It's very cheap. It's very, very cheap. Our model.
Yeah, our model is very, very cheap. We really,
Sir,
we organization
Sir,
also not.
I'm going to just, because of limited
we
time,
can,
another
we
question.
can talk. We can
But there,
talk
as you
later
can tell,
outside.
there's a wealth of expertise here, so I would just suggest you take your further questions offline. Then we'll go here and a question here.
Thank you. Leonid Todorov, General Manager, APTLD. As you know, some of our members classify under the most challenging categories, which is landlocked, small Pacific islands, and least developed countries. Now, in some of those territories or countries, a local CCTLD is at the same time a registry, let's say a regulator, the only source of, ISP, regulator, registry, I would put it in such a way. So if there is any lesson for them from you, I mean, speaking of collective wisdom, any lesson to learn from your experiences and any recommendations as to how to develop IXPs, especially considering that, for example, between two islands, there might be like 4,000 miles of ocean and no submarine cables and no infrastructure in place. And of course, great vulnerability because of all these, natural disasters. Thank you.
Well, that's a tough one. Who? Mike?
So that's an interesting question, and I can talk about an example I know a little bit about, which is not a small island, but is a small landlocked country called Lesotho, which is inside South Africa, if you like. It's surrounded by South Africa. They have 3 telecoms operators in Lesotho, and the regulator got a little bit involved and encouraged people to set up an internet exchange point in Lesotho to help exchange local traffic locally. And this, even though it's only between 3 operators, which is the minimum you need for an internet exchange, actually you can't have less than 3 because then it's just a connection. Between 3 operators, and it's only exchanging a few megabits of traffic, given that the price for their international connectivity at the time I was talking to them, that was 2 or 3 years ago, was at $1,000 a megabit. A few megabits of traffic just between the local ISPs has a big impact. So also to the other gentleman from India who says that he only has a small amount of traffic on his internet exchange, it's not necessarily growing. Think about what the value of that internet exchange is, independent of the traffic volume. And there can be a lot of direct value, and then we talked earlier about some of the indirect value and the second order effects that come from that as well. So if there's multiple operators you can bring together on these islands, and even if it's only very small volumes of traffic that are exchanged, there can be a lot of benefits there.
Thanks. Gentleman here. Did you want to add something to that? No.
Thank you, Byron. Mike Jensen from the Association for Progressive Communications. I would just first like to ask for a clarification on this idea of having mandatory multilateral peering and having bilateral peering. If you already have mandatory multilateral peering, it's not clear to me how the bilateral peering fits into that. The question I had was around I guess scaling down IXPs. It's very interesting to see the members of the panel here who have experience with many IXPs in the country. How far down do we go in terms of small villages are going to ultimately have IXPs? What are the dynamics that drive the duplication or multiplication of IXPs within a country? Thank you.
Ariel, did you want to just answer the first question, and then anybody else want to speak to the second question?
In our process, the multilateral agreement was as a result of the incumbent policies. At the beginning, we didn't have. As the incumbent leave us and trying to sell IP transit, we build this kind of shield, saying, at least you are obligated to give us your local traffic. And this is the multilateral. And then when we understood that the traffic didn't grow up enough as we needed, we understand that at least one IP transit, international IP transit, must be part of us. And we understood that they need to sell to the other part of the other traffic, the international traffic. So our history was, or we made some kind of economic pool that we bought all together from one more capacity, or we allow them to have this kind of bilateral agreement. Somewhat. I don't know if...
Anybody want to comment on how small can you go? How small is still viable and worthwhile?
All right. I can give a couple examples. Using British Virgin Islands, one of the first IXPs in the English-speaking Caribbean with a population of 32,000. You had 3 operators, all of whom had very profitable telephony businesses, and all of whom resisted starting an IX until the regulator did this one simple thing, said that any local traffic should remain on local networks. They didn't specify IXPs, they didn't specify any technical solution, they just made that particular edict. And once the exchange got up and running, the providers found that there was, in fact, local traffic to be exchanged. Now, we're talking a population of 32,000. So we're not talking massive amounts, but given the cost of wholesale bandwidth for most of the countries in the Caribbean, it actually turned out to be a very significant economic figure for those ISPs. And when Grenada started, population 108 or 107,000, and St. Vincent, which was most recent, they too found that even though the populations were small and the networks weren't moving huge amounts of traffic, the cost saving per megabit kept in country was significant enough for them to reinvest in other infrastructure development and so on. So I have found that size does not in fact matter, population size doesn't matter. Keeping local traffic is what matters.
Thanks, that's a great insight. And there was, last question.
My name is Mwendwa Kivuva from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm an Internet Society ambassador. A lot has been done to establish IXPs, especially in the developing world. And ISOC and Google, for example, have been helping countries in Africa actually set up these IXPs. What I'm wondering is, excuse me, what can be done to ensure at least there's at least one IXP in each country? Because these guys have been on the ground for like 10 years, but the progress is so small in the growth of this number of IXPs. For example, in my region, what can be done to really spur up the growth? Because we all know the benefits. You're actually preaching to the converted, but we still don't have these IXPs in our regions. But Kenya, of course, is an exception. Thank you.
A simple question, very hard to answer. Anybody want to take a very short stab at answering that? Mike, sure.
So the Internet Society have done a great job in Africa with the IXPs program of going out and training people about how to set up internet exchanges. I think a key point, and perhaps to wrap up here, is you can't force these things, and Bolivia is a great example of how forcing an internet exchange doesn't actually provide any benefits. And also internet exchanges are not a kind of a universal panacea solution to all your internet economy problems. If you have all the kind of the basics in place in terms of the right laws, regulations, competition between telecoms operators and so on, internet exchanges will spontaneously appear. They can sometimes have a bit of a push and a help, but we need to get the full environment right for these things to happen.
Thanks, and actually that captured probably some of my final comments to wrap this up. You know, we've heard a couple of stories about how they've started, and successful ones have started. There's a unique story to almost all of them, whether they start with research networks or prodding from regulators or spontaneous combustion in some other way. There's no single story to get them started, but it typically does, as we heard. It takes a champion. Sometimes that can be an individual. Most often it has to be a company or organization who has the muscle and the interest. And I think that speaks to the next point. There has to be an interest, and not just I'm interested in doing this, but a commercial rationale for them to be sustainable that each of the actors and participants see for themselves. And while they may not see it at the outset, part of what I think I've learned in our journey, and I've heard on this panel, is that it takes time and effort for the actors to actually see their benefit and to not necessarily worry about that, to appreciate that it may take some time and education for the actors to actually see their benefit, but generally they do, be it price, be it performance, resiliency, redundancy, whatever. The other interesting thing here is all of the spin-off benefits that we may not necessarily associate with IXPs, but that are real, be they fiber being laid, new data centers, et cetera, as we've heard. And ideally, it takes many different types of members, not just ISPs, but also content providers and other types of members. And an open, inclusive IXP is the kind of IXP that is most likely to succeed in the long term. But it's not all roses. Just because you start one doesn't mean it will survive or show benefit to the community. And it takes many factors to come together to create a successful one. And I think we've heard an interesting story about how sometimes they don't work or can't work, or they go into hibernation. And I know in Canada we've experienced both success and hibernation in our IXPs, and I think that that is a universal story. So, as Mike said, they're not necessarily a panacea, but they certainly can provide huge benefit to the community if done right. I'd like to thank all the panelists here for their wealth of experience, and thank you for the questions. Thank you, panelists.